All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are listening. I'm really excited for this week's session. I have Dr. Omar Saleem, who is an internist by training, but more importantly, or equally importantly, I should say, is also an AI builder and a real expert with AI, and not just somebody. I feel like there's a lot of people who are physicians who kind of talk about AI, but they don't actually use it. If you actually really look at it, like they're kind of just using ChatGPT as a question answer, they're kind of commenting. Omar is not one of these people. He is somebody who has rolled up his sleeves really the last 3+ years, has used the tools as they've been developed. He's built tools, he's built software, he's worked with clinicians, he's deployed things in production. So he knows what he's talking about. You probably have seen some of his content on LinkedIn, a really insightful person on all things AI and healthcare. And so I'm really excited to bring him on. He is, as I mentioned, internist by training. He currently is CEO of a company called Dr. Vibe, which is all about bringing education on how to use AI to clinicians. And then he is also a leader of a practice called Zinda Health, which is focused on health for and longevity, specifically for South Asians, which I think both of us and many of you listening can appreciate is a population that has very different health needs. And I think Omar has done a really great job uncovering and optimizing against that. So Omar, welcome. Hopefully that was a good enough bio for you. I hope I did you justice. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
No, thank you, Anant, for having me. I'm a big fan of all your work that you've done. I would say one of the leaders in many spaces. So not just longevity, not just AI and healthcare, but it's a privilege to be here. And thank you for having me and looking forward to chatting.
Well, let's just kind of dive into a question that I'm sure is kind of top of mind for a lot of people, which is what's your current setup, right? Like every week, it seems like there's new tools, new models coming out. Different models are surpassing each other in these leaderboards. Tell us a little bit about your AI setup. Like, what are you using right now?
It's a great place to start. And I think I like to think of it from almost like two different parallel universes or layers. And the reason I have two different parallel layers is I'm also an experimentalist when it comes to AI. So, but I also appreciate the importance of HIPAA compliance or importance of any other form of compliance of reliability when it comes to patient care. So for my clinic, I'm primarily a Google user. And the reason for that is because their BAA is very friendly, but also their setup is also very friendly. So primarily using Google Workspace combined with Vertex with the BAA to kind of experiment there and have apps that are inside of that. And that allows me access to Claude, Gemini Flash. So all these things where I can build tools for patients while also relying on Google Workspace for most of my patient communication, most of where the patient data lives, and then of course my EMR. So the EMRs are connected, but that's been a bit of a grind just because I think EMRs are slow to catching up with the integration layer. So right now, primarily for practice, what it is.
Got it. Which EMR do you use out of
So I
curiosity?
use Charm. I use Charm primarily because it has a good, they have a good REST API product, and they've been spending the past couple of years to improve that significantly. So that's the main reason why. And the other reason is because my use of an EMR is primarily for prescribing and for ordering labs, and that's about it. Everything else then goes into that compliant layer that's primarily in Google. So that's where all the processing happens.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I think I'm also a big fan of Google as just kind of like a workhorse model. I think for what you said about getting BAAs executed, they are able to do that as compared to others. Like there's actually a meme about how long it takes to get Anthropic to sign a BAA. It's like that Titanic meme of
Yeah.
like it's been like 87 years or something like that.
Very hard.
Yeah, so I'm sure they're working on it. I'm sure they'll get better. But
Yeah.
like, yeah, Google, I think it's also Google has been serving healthcare for a while. They know what it means, to serve the healthcare industry. They've had GCP, G Suite, these other products that have been there. I think the other thing that I like about, and this is something I'm curious to get your perspective, is I think their models are very token efficient, especially the new one, like 3.5 Flash. I think Google was the first to have the 1 million context window, and they're also just, they have these models that are just very efficient and delivering a good balance of quality and cost. Where if you're using them as a workhorse to run many analyses over the course of a day, that actually matters. Has that been your experience?
I think Flash as a model has been extremely underrated, especially when it comes to building tools. GPT gets a lot of interest. Cloud, of course, gets a lot of interest from a building perspective. But when it comes to when you're building, say, like apps that patients will be able to upload anything if they want to upload PDFs, if they want to deal with lab reports or imaging. Flash can take care of all of that for you with just one API key, and I think that's extremely underappreciated. And the other thing that you mentioned is token cost, and I think that is starting to come into focus more and more over the past, I would say, like 6 months. I think before everyone was ignoring it, they're like, okay, well, hopefully these guys bring the cost down. But now, Flash is so capable at so many different tasks that you can manage it much more cleanly. Second is your token cost always stay pretty low. The other thing I wanted to mention with Flash is the ability to do like chat. So if you have like a patient chat that you're communicating with, Flash is also very responsive in that. So the speed goes a long way with patients. I think they don't want to wait 4 or 5 minutes for the model kind of processing. Flash does it a lot faster, and you can also wrap Flash around different things. So if you want very high accuracy, you want like a Gemini 3.1 Pro or even a like Opus 4.7, you can wrap Flash around that. So where Flash is doing primarily the communication with the patient, and then it goes and asks Claude if it wants anything in particular. So that's the other thing that I think is really significantly changed over the past 2 months. I'd say it's pretty crazy.
If you look at some of the documentation around the latest Flash release, a big focus for them, and I think this is kind of the topic of today, is agents, right? Like they've built these new models with agents in mind, envisioning this idea of calling models multiple times for tool calls, things like that. And by the way, neither of us have any affiliation with any. We just have accounts and we use it. But no, I think it's a really great workhorse. And I think like, there's so much potential, right? Like, I think they announced some of this stuff at the last meeting, but like, just given how ubiquitous Google services are, right? All of us
Mm,
use G Suite, we're using Gmail. They, in my opinion, have the chance to build one of the first true killer apps
yep.
for AI, which is the actual personal assistant
Yeah.
that is secure, doesn't constantly break, and like OpenClaw does. I think
Yeah.
there's so much promise.
So 2 days ago, I switched my OpenClaw to Flash, and the experience is completely different. OpenClaw is still breaking; it doesn't fix that part. But now Flash is able to one is very much more responsive. But even on your corpus, so whichever like whatever you use, Obsidian, whatever if you have a rag, whatever you have set up, the fetch is so much faster. Like the experience is almost instantaneous. Where before with this, it just took almost like a minute to get a response on basic queries. So I think that that's gonna, and then the other thing that Flash does is that if you want to create, and I think this is maybe a little bit beyond this, but I think a lot of HTML is becoming the de facto kind of visualization layer for how we interact with these models, just because that's how they talk, right? Code. So like video is becoming HTML with motion design. You're seeing audio come into play. So Flash is also very good at creating motion design. So if you want to create presentations on the fly, if you want to create visualizations for a patient, you can do that with Flash much more in much better quality than you can with like Claude or GPT.
Yeah.
So
I just pulled this up. I'll show it on the screen again. But people might be wondering about OpenClaw. Should they mess with it? My advice is don't bother at this point. It's basically going to die, or at least the interest, right? And I think it's probably a matter of weeks or months before we have a really high quality replacement from Google. I mean, even Claude Cowork is pretty good. I think that the OpenClaw guy pulled off one of the all-time sell the top. Like that guy
yeah,
nailed it. I'm sure he made like hundreds of millions of dollars and sold that thing, and now it's dead. Do you agree, or do you think it's
yeah, 100%.
messing around with OpenClaw?
Yeah, I don't think it's worth it at this point. I think Hermes agent is one that to keep an eye on. I wouldn't mess with that either. Primarily because like especially if you're a physician, it's one of those things like what is your ROI and on what you're doing, right? So like if you don't have a lot of time on your hands, half the time. The managed agents from Claude or now with Gemini, I'm guessing that Google will probably come out with like an anti-gravity follow up, which will have these kind of agentic layers to it. Then that would be much better suited for that purpose. And because especially if you have GCP with BAA and you have a Google Workspace account, then it makes no sense at all to use, because then now you have to use a VPS, you have to set everything up. It's too much of a hassle. So I think for the risk, it's not worth it. If you like to play around with it, that's great. Hermes is one that I use for Zinda. So like my whole research is built on Hermes. but I've been transitioning that away to Claude. So what I do now is I have like nightly runs that run through all the research papers, run through different things that I'm interested in, and then that gets populated. And so that's basically how I do it right now.
Awesome. So yes, you mentioned that you're using Flash and kind of the Google ecosystem for your main kind of clinical work.
Mhm.
Are you still using Notebook LM? Is that still part of what you're using, or?
Notebook LM for primarily just for collating research, but I've actually been going away from it more and more. And primarily the reason is I think Notebook LM. It's almost been like an ebb and flow. So it always depends on what integrations are available for Notebook LM. Like yes, you can use Claude and Chrome and you can use that, but it's so token heavy that you end up using your usage gets used up pretty quickly. But Notebook LM is really good for making videos or their cinematic animations that they came out with. But with slides, I've had much more success with something like Open Slides and frameworks like that that are a bit more like you can control the output a lot more. So it's become a lot more reliable. I know NotebookLM came out with an update where you can adjust that. But the other thing is the HIPAA compliance of NotebookLM has been on and off sometimes. So that's the other reason I've been kind of in and out of NotebookLM. But when it comes to bringing together all my research, Obsidian's actually where a lot of that is moved now. And that's where it lives. I don't know what your thoughts are. Like my thing, the way I think is Markdown and that kind of text heavy language. I know like the Anthropic guys, they were focusing more on HTML, but I think for physicians and for medicine, I think you still need text heavy because I think you still have a lot of research that you work with. You still have a lot of papers that one deals with. The one thing I will say Notebook LM does do well with is PDFs compared to anyone else. I think that's the one area where it really thrives. So sometimes what I do is I have PDFs, I put them in there, and then I create like a breakdown, and then I move that over to Obsidian.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in case people's heads are spinning, listening to all this, I mean, there is like an endless array of tools that you could use. I would say, this is the advice I've given in the past is, to some extent, I would just pick one ecosystem and kind of stick with it and learn it well. And I think in that respect, it's really hard to go wrong, right? I think at least between OpenAI, Claude, and Gemini, like I think they all have really good starting points. They now have really good kind of connectors. I think that maybe Gemini doesn't have as much of a rich like third party connector ecosystem
Yeah,
as the other two.
mm,
Uh,
they're working on it though. I think they'll have a big system eventually.
yeah, cool. So let's maybe talk a little bit about agents, which is the topic of this conversation. What's kind of how do you think about agents? How should clinicians actually wrap their heads around it? Because like agents is such like a buzzword now. It's like
Mhm.
everywhere. How should people think about when to use them, how to use them, how to think about them? Yeah, I know you've done a lot of thinking on this.
It's quite the buzzword, and I think to kind of pull back, we have to think about Anthropic actually did a really good job of explaining this in their course that they had on agents. Is they're like, well, the model. If you think about the model is not an agent. The model is just a model. It'll do whatever it's told. It doesn't have any awareness or what they call state. So an agent is essentially something where the model has what's called state, and it has the ability to act. So it knows what's going on and it has a set of areas where it can act on. So that's essentially a basic agent. And in kind of model terms, we call it a harness. So a harness is basically an agent. It has context, it has memory, and it has tools that it can use to either get more memory or it can act on that. Now, there's a lot of, I think, buzz around like what agents are and what they can do, especially from a healthcare perspective, because there's a lot of you see a lot of ads for answering services. They're like, oh well, this is an agentic service that's answering this. Well, there's a lot of agents that are like, well, we're doing research, and these are research agents. So it's always important to kind of see what the scope of those agents are and what they're offering. There's a lot of times where all it is just automation, and I think automation kind of dressed up as agents where all they're doing is on a cron job or what's called the regular scheduled time, they're just going and seeking information. That's all it is. So what I like to think about when I look at agents is like what is the action that they're doing? What tools do they have access to? And the model really doesn't matter as much. It's more about those two components. And so if you were to build agents from scratch, basically an agent should be very scoped to a small area that it's doing. One agent should not be overarching in multiple areas that it's working on. So a lot of people think, well, I can have like a Jarvis who's going to do all these different tasks that anyone can think of. actually the best agents that perform are those who have very limited scope and very limited tool usage. And the reason for that is so that one, they don't go awry, they don't start doing things where they don't need to. So a good example is like if you're going to have an answering agent who takes care of leads that are coming into your clinic, that agent doesn't necessarily need to have access to the calendar and make adjustments to the calendar. That agent should be specialized only in answering, understanding what the clinic is about, and going from there. And then it should reach out to an agent that's responsible for the scheduling and take care of that scheduling for you. So that scope is very important because then that allows you to find points of failure. And the other thing is, in those points of failure, make adjustments that are needed. And then also, if you need to optimize, you can optimize further. So now, if that lead intake agent needs other skills, like say tomorrow it needs a LinkedIn posting skill, or if it needs an X posting skill, you can add only to that agent without overwhelming your whole workflow. So that's just, I think, from like an over like high picture, that's how you think about like how you make agentic structures. It's just very narrow scope and just thinking about what it has access to from a tool perspective and from a context perspective.
I think that a lot of people have this idea of just, let me just give my agent everything and then it'll just do everything, like this kind of Jarvis thing. I think you saw a lot of that with OpenClaw. And it just, I mean, certainly OpenClaw had other issues that made it break, but even with something that's well kind of engineered, you'll still have just, I mean, these things have limited context. As you ask them to do more and more things that stack on top of each other, the context decays. And so I totally agree with you that having more tightly scoped agents and having a team of agents do a set of things rather than having one agent do one thing can often be more fruitful. And I'll just kind of take a step back. And I think that even before you even think about having an agent, there's kind of another alternative, which is just to have, really, there's three alternatives, right? Like there's straight up deterministic software, which is kind of old school software that just runs based on algorithms, basically. It's fully deterministic. And many times that is the right answer, right? Like not
Yeah,
everything has to use
100%.
an LLM. A lot of cases, just, regular software is good. Just you can write code for that
Yeah,
using an LLM, but like
yeah,
it should not necessarily always include an LLM call every time. So I think that's
so
one.
true. Yeah,
The second option is to have like what's called like a deterministic pipeline, right? Which is basically you have like a series of pipeline calls that are consistent every time. So you have like one prompt and then another prompt, then another prompt, then another prompt. And these things run in sequence and they happen in a predictable way. And very often that is also a very good option, right? And then at the other end of the spectrum are agents, which have like this, they have much more autonomy, they have much more flexibility, they can decide what to do. And sometimes like that can be like sometimes people will be troubleshooting agents and be like, I can't get it to be consistent. Well, it's like, well, maybe it shouldn't be an agent to begin with. Maybe it should be
yeah.
one of these other things. What do you
So
think?
one of the reasons I like Workspace or Google Workspace is because it has Workspace Studio. And Workspace Studio is basically, they say it's a collection of agents, but actually the most powerful tools in Workspace Studio is just that you can connect Google Docs to email. So it's like, oh, if I get an email from X person, just add it to this file. And that's all it does. But it's so powerful because now you don't have to go take that attachment, click the move button and add it in, and it'll just automatically add it. It's like deterministic pathways are severely underrated from that perspective. Because a lot of the things we do, we don't realize that all we're just repetitive motion that we spend time on. And if that's done, then half the work is done. And I think that that's very aptly said. That part is extremely underrated to think about.
Yeah. Like I feel like a lot of people like over engineer things, right? Like there's actually, I actually just pulled this up. There's a really good, this is another meme about using AI where I mean like this guy's using a blowtorch to like light a cigar, right? Like a lot of people, it feels like, are using AI in this way, right? Like where they're basically they're like all they're trying to do is like do their emails, or they're just trying to do their emails and like have their emails like know what to do today. And it's like you don't need to like hook up Opus 4.8 and like run that every hour. Like that's what some people do, and they're like, "Oh, I gotta get the best." And
Yeah,
that's like a quick way to like, hit usage limits or wind up with huge bills and stuff. So like you
exactly.
don't need to like over engineer things like that, or like you don't need to always use like yeah, these heavy duty things. So, anyways, I completely agree.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, it also makes your setup durable. Like, if you want reliability, if you want durability, you know that if something breaks, it's not that part, and you know that, okay, this is how it was configured. It's always going to do that. And I think that maybe this is something that we can spend a bit of time on if you want to. So is reliability, because reliability of agents is not. I think it's not appreciated as much, and it's the probabilistic nature of them. Probabilistic nature really lends to a lot of failure points. Especially like a good example is like all these. If you think of a lot of the apps that are coming out that provide an interface for patients, like wearable apps that allow patients to talk in, a lot of them don't have guardrails. That there's people who are coders and they start putting in code in there and they're getting coding replies in an app that's made for diet or nutrition. So it's one of those things where I think they're so probabilistic that you can't control those things. So if you have deterministic areas in there, it improves the reliability of the app itself. There's a few coders who are doing that. They're using basically ChatGPT inside of a diet app, and they're using it for coding their terminal.
Oh yeah, I
So,
saw people are asking the Chipotle bot
oh,
about.
it was yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, like, let me just kind of bring this into something super practical, right? So, like, if you were asking, let's just say you had like your mom or your dad, and they were like, "Hey, I want to build an agent." Like, what would you like have them do? Like, what would you have them install? Like, what would you walk them through?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good place to start. So I like to use Claude. I use both Claude and Codex. I think Claude is a little bit easier for someone to get started with. They've improved the UI a bit for the desktop app, but it's way more powerful. I would say Codex is a lot more powerful, but Claude is probably the one I would start with just because it's easier to understand. Claude is the one I would start with. And basically just download the desktop app for Claude, go into Cowork, give it access to a folder that you want Claude to live in. You don't have to break it down into folders or anything like that, but just give it one folder that all your Claude stuff will live there. And it's like, okay, so if you are a researcher, so it's like, okay, I want to research about new therapies that are coming in or improving your VO2 max. You're just going to type that in there. And to set up an agent is really straightforward with Claude. Just ask it to set it up. But the thing you have to think about is like, okay, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to get some research data, what is it that I need for this? So I need context. So where is that context going to live? Usually within Claude is enough for someone who's starting up. Claude will take care of all that. It'll put it into the local folder. And that's where the agent will kind of get it, the information. Okay, this is what we're doing. It'll create its own prompt. Then the second part is like, where is it going to get that from? Like, is it going to access the internet? Is it going to access NGM? Where will that happen? So that's what we call tools. So basically, you can ask Claude, okay, what tools should I use? That's probably the way I like to do it. Like, I always ask Claude, like, what is it that is probably ideal for this? But if you're a good researcher, you would know that PubMed is an option that you can access. There's bioarchive, medRxiv that you can also access. So the other reason I like Claude is because setting up these tools is a little bit easier, is more friendly compared to user friendly compared to Codex. And basically with Claude, all you have to do is go into the connectors section, add in PubMed as a connector, and you can add medRxiv as a connector. And then once you do that, you basically have the structure of an agent. Now that you can run, so you can tell it, okay, maybe every night or every day at 9 a.m., can you go through all the research that's coming in for this? And we got the new papers that have come up for VO2 max. And now what do you do with that? Like, how is it you're going to see it? So either you can have Claude just put up a report in the Claude chat, or you'll be like, well, can you make it into a document that I can kind of review and I can take with me and put it into my Google Drive? So you would give Claude access to your Google Drive. You can make a Google Doc, or you can make it just a document and just put it in there, and then you'll have access to it. So like every day at 9 a.m., it'll run that. By 9:10 or so, you'll have access to a report on that topic. So that's basically an agent scheduled. It's not reactive. Most agents tend to be like that. I think if you have a trigger, so a trigger is basically a call or something else that comes in. That is something that you can set up, but that becomes a little bit more complicated. You would have to go outside of Claude for that, for the most part. But that's basically when you go into managed agents or other tools like that that you would use.
Well, in a word, what you can do for those of you who are listening, you can essentially use Claude to just help you set up. You can just literally open up Claude, download the desktop app, open up Cowork and say, hey, I want to make an agent. Here's what I want it to help me do. And then it will literally tell you what to do. It will create the scaffolding for it. It will suggest connectors. You can do all of that. I would say I agree. Claude is probably where I would start most people. I do think Codex is actually a better, at least
Yeah,
as of this recording,
I agree.
Codex is a better app. It's more stable. It's more reliable. I think it's honestly, it's getting better and better. I know 5.5 was a new pre-train, a new and
Mhm.
like so I think like this model is now getting better and better like every week. So I think if you can, and I think like the difficulty, and you tell me if you agree, the difficulty with Codex is that it still presents itself as kind of like an IDE. It kind of presents itself through the lens of
Yeah,
a development environment where it asks you to like set up a repo and like it's not like actually Cowork is doing the same thing. It's just kind of
yeah,
dressing it up differently.
it's the exact same thing.
Codex just needs to like make the same equivalent
Yeah.
of Cowork, and then I think it'll be. I would actually, at least right now, recommend that just because I find the Claude app to be very unstable. It
Mm.
crashes a lot. I mean, it's buggy. It has like all these. It feels like they used Claude. Literally, they said it feels like
They did.
they make Claude, and that means it feels like a vibe coded tool.
Yeah.
To be honest,
Especially the earlier versions of Claude, like the desktop app, were very like, especially Claude Code, were very crude, where they had so many gaps in the UI, and you're like, why is that? Like the repo is so hard to access. It doesn't make any sense. But I totally agree. Like Codex is like I use Codex probably 85% to 90% of the time. Claude, I only use because, like I mentioned, so Claude has really good access to like MCPs, some of them. So like in Codex, you can easily just like copy paste the URL of the website that has like the MCP link for that website and put into Codex, it'll set it up for you. If someone doesn't know to do that, they go into the MCP section. It's very complicated to set it up. So not very complicated, but it's like you have to kind of copy paste things in. So that's what I would recommend. Like if someone wants like a really good, reliable, and the other thing with Codex is you have access to images too from OpenAI, which is really good. So, and it's integrated into that. So that makes websites really nice, but also like if you need diagrams and stuff within your work, you can kind of integrate those in pretty easily.
so this is kind of like our recommendation for like the best way to get started. I think I would agree Claude is the best way to get started. It's the most user friendly right now. Somebody asked, what's the most economic and efficient, right? So if you're somebody who's looking to optimize fully, and I think we kind of talked about this already, but what would you say? What would you say that is?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how much you're willing to go because I've tried some interesting combinations. I think the best option is actually open code or anti-gravity, but anti-gravity has a very high learning curve. Like it's a very steep learning curve because it still does everything in terms of like a repo setup and almost like a VS Code kind of ID type of look. Open code is actually a lot easier. So there's two things you could do. One is if you want something economical, I still think that a ChatGPT $20 plus plan with Codex gets you a very long way. If you use 5.5 on regular, like you don't have to use high or extra high, you just use medium, and you'll be making some really good apps. You'll be making good agents with that. So it's a really very capable platform. That to me is probably the best. For $20, you're going to be able to make probably like hundreds of apps, I would say. With that, Claude is also more token heavy. It eats up a lot more token. It doesn't manage tokens well. It doesn't manage compaction well of the chat. So you end up using up a lot of your cloud usage and you don't get as much in that $20 plan compared to the chat GPT plan. But if you want co-work, then you can get the $20 plan. And that's probably the most economical way of doing that. You don't need Max to make good agents, kind of good
Yeah,
users.
I think that's a good call. I'll tell you my opinion is that I actually think that Google, and again, this does require you to have some familiarity with IDEs and this sort of thing. But I don't know if you saw this. This was actually just released last week. Is basically these managed, because I
Mhm.
think it is helpful to have. So just to give people a distinction, you can make an agent yourself, but at this point, there are also ways to streamline some of that and to have some of the complexity handled by the model. And so that's what this concept of managed agents is. And so you don't have to like specify everything. There's this new anti-gravity managed agent that you can use, and it can do like, I mean, via code execution, you can do almost anything, but then it natively has these other things like Google search and local search. And again, like I think that the Gemini, especially with Flash 3.5, at least today, right? Like for economical, like that to me stands out. Like I think
Yeah.
efficiency to me is is all about the Google stack right now. I will say like one thing that I'm paying attention to, and I know this may sound crazy, but I actually think Grok could get a lot better.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's been basically garbage for the last year, and I think even Elon Musk would agree. It's been basically useless. It's basically
Yeah.
used only to make these like stupid images on Twitter for like memes.
Imagine so.
That's the main purpose. The actual like LLM, the other things are just not very good. But XAI has access to the most data centers. So like basically Elon has built all of these data centers under his control. He's leasing out some of the capacity right now to
Crazy.
Anthropic actually. But like, to some degree, this all reduces down to like how much compute you have access to. Like I could see that eventually making Grok really, really good. And actually, I haven't checked this out. I don't know if you have, but they just released a Grok build. I think it's in beta, which is their like
Yeah.
coding harness. They are equivalent to Claude Code and Codex. So I could see that improving pretty quickly. And like I do know historically, Grok has also been very cheap and efficient. So I
Mhm.
think like, that's one that I would pay attention to. I think like right now, and you tell me, I'm curious to get your sense. Like this is kind of like my read of the whole landscape. I think, for just pure like raw intelligence, it's probably a neck and neck between Opus and GPT,
Mhm.
right? Like depending on what you're doing, like for
Yeah.
advanced research, I think GPT with the Pro is really, really good. Nothing else is like that. For like really, really complex coding or especially design, I still think Opus is the best. I think Google is kind of like an efficiency player.
Mhm.
And then I think for images, I'd say OpenAI is the best right now. Claude
Yeah.
doesn't, they don't even do any of that. They've not bothered with that.
They're like whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's this is very interesting.
And then like I think Grok could be like another like efficiency player. That's kind of like my read. What was
Yeah.
what
Yeah, 100%. I think Grok is very underrated. So actually, going back like a year, I think it's still somewhat true is that Grok is extremely reliable when it comes to hallucinations, actually. So Grok was the best with hallucinations up until the 5.4 plus models came out and Opus 4.6 came out. And I think Grok will likely take back that mantle just because they have such good quality from, especially from X. I know there's a lot of trash on X sometimes, but it's really really good training data for that. And so I think they'll definitely make some leaps, and then the cursor acquisition. I think that'll go a long way. So I actually interesting you mentioned that. Like 2 days ago, I sent the BA request for Grok because I think there's a lot of capabilities there to test, and from an efficiency perspective and speed as well. So their latency is really really good for what they offer for cost and also the agent kind of structure they have. So I think it's dangerous to sleep on them. That's the one.
people can love Elon, they can hate him, whatever. It's very you kind of
Yeah.
sleep on him and what he does at your own risk at this point. But yeah, I'm following that too. So I guess let's talk a little bit about like AI enabled software. Like we've been talking
Mhm.
primarily about like the frontier models themselves and tools built around them, agents built around them. As you know, there are also like a number of companies that sell to physicians that are kind of like AI enabled software. We have like AI enabled EHRs like Ultralight and others. There's Longevitix. There's a whole host of other tools like Heads Up Health and a whole bunch of other ones that I'm sure I'm forgetting. How should clinicians think about those? And how should they think about the decision? Like, should I build something myself or should I sign up with a third party vendor? Like, how do you advise people on that? And how do you think about that for yourself?
Yeah, it's something that I personally thought about quite a bit before I even built. And this is like coming from someone who likes to build things. I was like, okay, maybe I should go with a sidecar like Longevitix. So pause for a second. So there's two ways that we're seeing kind of the emergence of AI native software. One is within EMRs. So EMRs are starting to become AI native in two forms. So one is they're either going headless primarily. So like you're seeing this with Canvas. Healthy is taking this kind of approach as well, where they're like, well, what is our strongest strength? Our strength is that we are the source of truth, and we're going to double down on being a source of truth that anyone can access and build tools on top of. Even though we'll also provide those services and provide the dashboards and things like that, but we'll also have those capabilities. The other is something like what Ultralight is doing, and a few other EMRs that are coming about. They're focusing more towards, will be the one-stop solution, because not every physician wants to be a builder. Not every physician wants to spend time building out different tools. They don't want to deal with connecting all these APIs. They don't want to go to Terra and have to pay $400 a month for those APIs. So I think that is also emerging as an option. So I think it really comes down to what type of practice you have. Is it a practice that you want to spend time building these tools out, that you have time to build these tools out, or do you have a full-fledged practice where you're working 10 hours a day and you don't really have time to adopt those things? In that setting, Ultrablight would probably be the ideal solution. The other option is, if you already are unhealthy, if you're already on Canvas, or if you have another EMR, like I use Charm, they're like, well, I have this EMR, it doesn't have all these functionalities. I don't want to move to Ultra Bright because there's a cost to doing that. I have years and years of data in here. My patients are comfortable here. But I myself, as a physician, I want more insight onto the data of these patients because I may be expanding towards a longevity type practice. Then in that setting, a longevitics or a heads up health becomes really useful. How I see this emerging is tricky because it's and we see this in the scribe space with Epic, and where our bridge is now starting to do a lot of clinical decision support that maybe open evidence was doing before, and then they could also be a source of record like Epic is. And I think in this space as well, like longevitics and heads up health, they now have more eyeball or more attention of the physician than even the EMR does. So it's hard to see kind of how this evolves. I think I'll leave that to, to the people who are doing it. I think there's the value from a physician perspective. If you don't have the time to build or the capability from a perspective of understanding the technology, then I think the longevitics and heads up makes sense. If you do have any kind of passion towards building, and I think I wrote about this morning, was this concept of and this is definitely taken from Palantir, forward deployed physician. And this idea that we're heading to a time where English and spoken language is all you need to build the tool out. And that ease is going to make things, one, it'll be easy to build, but other thing is that we'll also be able to customize towards the type of practice you have. So I think if that is your mindset, then it's worth learning how to build these out, how to build these tools out, how to think about this dashboard, something that I can make for each patient, or is it something that I can build for myself to see things how I like to see it? Can I make agents on top of this? So it, I know it doesn't really answer the question, but I think it really comes down to where your priorities. And the nice thing is we're now seeing a marketplace for each of those priorities. And that's basically where you would go, is if you enjoy building, if you're like, well, I can talk to Claude and I like doing this, it's worth trying. And if it's not something that's working, then you can always go towards a sidecar. Now, one thing I do want to mention, and going back to reliability, is that what these platforms offer is reliability. They'll give you a good solution that'll have the compliance, that'll have the different tooling that you need, that you don't have to worry about on a daily basis. Because if something breaks, it's on you to fix it. And if something is non-compliant, then you are at risk of having like a lawsuit or whatever that comes with that. So that's one thing to kind of consider when you're building.
Yeah, no, I think I generally agree with that. And I'll say two things. One is I think there always has been a line at which, once you have resources above that line, it kind of makes sense to consider building something on your own. And below that line, you should just buy something off the shelf. Right? And I think historically it was, unless you're like a Series C, Series D stage company that's very mature and you have a lot of engineers and you have very specific business needs, only then should you build your own EHR. This is something that we looked at Verta, right, when I was at that company. And I feel like what we've seen with AI enabled coding is that that line has gone way down to the point where I would say now, I do think if you're a solo clinician, you don't have anyone else. I think certainly I would agree with you that using something off the shelf makes sense. But if you have the resources to staff up any sort of engineering, like even if it's just like one or two people, honestly, at this point.
Mm.
Like, I do think that can give you a lot of leverage because
Yeah.
here's and like, look, I think Ultralight's a fantastic product. I know the team there well. Canvas, same thing. These are phenomenal products. I do think that there is a need for these things just in general to like carry out some healthcare transactions, like sending prescriptions and like I don't see OpenAI and Claude getting into those things anytime soon. Maybe you never say never, right? They have so
Yeah,
much
that's
money,
true.
maybe they will, but you kind of need them for that reason. But here's the thing I will say is that these companies are basically going to make decisions on what models to use for you.
Yeah.
And like, yes, in some ways that's great because it takes some of the complexity out. But, and this has come up a few times, right? Like, if you are running a high end practice and if you are doing pretty complicated, sophisticated analyses that involve analyzing complex data sets, right? Like genetics and imaging and all these other things that we get sometimes, you might want to use Opus or deep research or the state of the art frontier model. I can tell you that none of these software companies are using the state of the art. They are using Flash. They're
Mm.
using things to keep, they got to manage
Yeah.
costs, right? Like, they
Mm.
can't run a business. They need to
Impossible.
have margin. And so they're making that decision for you, right?
Yeah.
And if you build something on your own, you can make choices like that. You can say, hey, well, you know what? I actually, because my practice is small and high end, like, I actually do want to use Opus every time I analyze a case because it's worth it to me. Whereas with these companies, like, they're not going to tell you which models they're using. Maybe some of them will, but to my knowledge, they're not. They're going to say, well, we have a really good AI. Here's our benchmarks and blah, blah, blah. But like, if you want to have that customization, it can be worth it. On the flip side, if you do choose to build something, I think what people underestimate is building is easy, but maintaining is hard, right? Having
Very
to
hard.
continue to babysit this thing and fix it when it breaks and all these things, it is time consuming. But I think if you have enough resources to keep that up, then I think it could make sense. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think the tools are getting there. We're maintaining. So a good example is going back to Codex. It's like you can set up these cron jobs overnight. Okay, like take a look, make sure like the uptime is good, and do whole diagnostics. One, you can do that, and the other thing you mentioned is you can always like if you have a high end practice or if you have the resources, then having one person just maintaining it makes economic sense because to your patients, the experience they get will be exponentially better and you can provide and the other thing is like and this is kind of like where with Dr. Vibe, that's our goal as these technologies compound. So like right now we're at a certain point, but these wearables are coming in, all these different data sets are going to come in, and it's hard to rely on an EMR or whoever it is to integrate all of those, like even sidecars, like heads up or longevitics, you don't know which ones they're going to integrate with, which ones they're not going to integrate with. And I think as we see a bigger consumer wearable revolution, patients will demand you to look at that data, and being able to integrate that will become a premium offering of its own. And I think that that's something to consider as well.
I would highly recommend people certainly do demos, check these products out. Their roadmaps are evolving all the time. And the other thing is that these companies are also benefiting from the AI wave. They're able to ship features
Mhm.
faster. So I think it's all a balance. I think there's no right or wrong answer. I think people should be open minded about both. And yeah, I think Canvas, Ultralight, I mean, they're both fantastic
Yeah,
products. There's others too,
yeah.
Longevitix.
Good.
Encourage people to check these all out. I know we're coming up on time. Let me just kind of ask you one question that comes to mind for me. It's something that it comes up a lot, right? And this is not necessarily like a building related question, but it does relate to AI as it relates to healthcare for a lot of people. And I want to talk about open evidence.
Mhm.
I mean, the
Yeah.
company has grown tremendously, huge valuation. I mean, it's the fastest adopted physician product of all time, I think. But at the same time, what is the durable advantage here? Because at some point, these foundational models are going to get good enough to answer these. And to some extent, some would argue they already are. So, what do you think about that? What do you think about open evidence? And what do you think about how clinicians should think about? I'm not talking about just like knowledge. I'm not talking about like
Mhm.
agents, all this other stuff. I'm talking about just straight up knowledge. How should physicians think about using something like open evidence versus using one of the foundational models? And how do you see that playing out over time?
Actually, it's something that I've been thinking about a lot because I'm the head of education at Hormonally, so that I create a lot of educational tools there as well, and that's basically a clinical decision support tool for peptides regenerative medicine. One of the reasons we came up with that, and we've had a lot of demand from physicians, especially in the longevity space, is because open evidence sometimes doesn't have a lot of that knowledge base that's in there because that knowledge base hasn't even been put into journals. I think so let's pull back again and kind of think of what open evidence is getting their information from. Primarily, it's from these like from the NEJM, from JAMA, Cochrane Review. So it has amazing literature. It has amazing coverage for literature. But when we think about as physicians, we use open evidence. It's an amazing platform in terms of the way the agent structure is done, the way it provides knowledge. But a lot of times, when I ask questions about recent advances that have been made or recent changes that have been made, or even thinking outside the box. So, like if I want to take care of a patient who has mycotoxins going on, and it's not something that has been discussed as much in literature, open evidence sometimes just doesn't respond to me because it's not in that coverage space. So, I think when physicians use it, they should know that it's not a full solution at times for this. It's an amazing solution if you want a lot of that research to be done, but I always complement that with a Claude or an Open AI because when you add in those connectors, like with PubMed, you can bring in very similar depth, but it also has the capability to be a lot more open in terms of thinking outside the box from that perspective. And this is a personal critique, maybe from how I think of like, especially when I think of an agentic structure of how we, so say like I'm thinking 10 to 15 years down the road here. So when you think of agents, an agent is only as good as the question that is asked. So to me, an open evidence agent makes a lot more sense than just a question box because I think you have to bounce off a lot of questions because LLMs only answer questions that you ask them. And although if you look at Claude 4.8, it has a little bit of that where it has adversarial thinking. Most don't, and open evidence doesn't when it comes to clinical questions. So I think that is something that only happens if you have the ability to think outside of that. So I don't know. That was my kind of thought process with open evidence. So I usually tend to use more OpenAI, Grok as well, and then also Claude for that, and then kind of complement that with open evidence as.
I would tend to agree. People who are listening know I've built this tool called Next Generation Medicine AI platform. And similar, what I found is that for personalized precision, longevity medicine, whatever you want to call it, it requires a different approach. It's more of a first principle systems biology, at least for me, systems biology oriented approach. And it's not just evidence based medicine, it's like a different way of thinking. And so these other models ultimately trade on the internet, right? And so most of what medicine is on the internet is evidence-based medicine. And so if what you're doing is evidence-based medicine, I think open evidence is fantastic, as is, Claude. And I think I agree, like combining the two or the three is great. But I do think I really like what you said around like having these tools be agents, right? Like, because I think ultimately it's almost like consulting different doctors. It's almost on some level
Yeah,
these things reduce down to like personalities, right? Like they're like individual people, right?
it's true.
Or like experts, right? And so maybe the best care is to consult, right? Like I'm going to consult next generation medicine. I'm going to consult hormonally. I'm going to consult.
Exactly.
I want to get like different perspectives. Each one has a different philosophy, and through that, I'm going to make up a decision what I want to do. I kind of think like it's kind of like saying like what's the best AI? It's kind of like saying what's the best way to think. Like,
Yeah,
and I don't think there is necessarily. I think there's different ways of
exactly.
thinking that can be useful in different ways. At the end of it, that's what these things are. They're ways of thinking. And I think that's probably the durable distinction over time. But like right now, we're trying to get these things up to a certain level of just basic intelligence. But then once we achieve that, I think the differentiation is really around the way of thinking and like which way of thinking is appropriate or resonates with the individual.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, that's a great structure because if you think about how things are going, agents will make this transaction, the thinking transaction, so fast that right now we're thinking, well, who's going to go to next gen? Who's going to go to hormone? Well, these agents are going to go to like multiple places. They're going to run parallel. So time becomes compressed and the thinking time becomes compressed. And so that's the way to think about it. Like you're not gonna go one by one sequentially. You're gonna go and then kind of weigh each option as it comes in.
Well, we're at time. I feel like we could go on for another hour here. We definitely got to do this
Yeah,
again. This is a lot of fun.
for
Maybe
sure.
we can do this kind of periodically as like new updates happen and stuff, and we can kind of check in and share with everyone kind of what our thoughts are. But
Yeah, we
Omar, thank
enjoyed
you
it.
so much.
No, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it, and always down.
Have a good weekend, everyone. Bye.